Most big heist stories kinda sound the same. You know the drill. Some genius guy, down on his luck, lands a job at a bank, then starts plotting to rob it. He puts together this brilliant plan, hires a slick team with experts in everything, and they pull off the job with insane precision. But then, always, there's that one idiot in the crew. One dumb move, and boom, everything crashes. The cops show up, everybody goes to jail, and it all falls apart. But this story, it's nothing like that. This time, we're not talking about a genius. We're talking about a totally average guy. No brilliant background. And yet, he pulls off a master plan. Not to make the heist succeed, but to make it fail. His crew? Just 4 people. All worn out, no real skills. Not a single one of them had any idea what they were doing. The robbery itself? It kinda just happened, almost by accident. It was simple, quiet, so smooth. It was almost boring. And yeah, one of them messed up. But he didn't blow their cover. He actually exposed 2 different gangs at the same time. And through all of it, the stolen money still headed straight for Gaza. See, the guy behind it all, the so-called ordinary man, he was actually a genius in disguise. He had the whole thing memorized like a movie script. Every little detail was calculated. His motto? Anything's allowed, except touching the money. And he knew, real success doesn't start with winning. It starts with failing. Because a truly smart guy doesn't ask, how do I succeed? He asks, how do I handle failure? For the first time, we've got a heist that looks dead simple on the outside, but is crazy complex on the inside. It went down in broad daylight. No violence, no noise. Just quiet chaos, loaded with secrets and mysteries. The mastermind made everyone think it was just a random incident. But the truth? He planned every move. He knew they'd figure him out, and he had a whole separate plan ready for that moment too. He faced challenge after challenge, and somehow it all looked like pure luck, like fate. But it wasn't. Every bit of it was on purpose, like a hidden chess game, and he was always 5 steps ahead of everyone else. And out of the thousands chasing the American dream, there was one Cuban teenager, just 16 years old, named Carlos Monzon. In 1989, Carlos Monzon left Cuba and moved to the United States. He truly believed it would only take a few years of hard work before he'd finally live the American dream. To him, it wasn't just a hope. It felt like a guarantee. The land of opportunity had to deliver. But reality hit way harder than he ever imagined. Life tore him apart, stripped him of his illusions, and showed him that the American dream, it was more like a game show prize, a lucky break that only 1 in a million ever gets. Still, Carlos didn't give up. He didn't go back to Cuba. He stayed, grinding his way through dozens of random jobs, just trying to live a decent, honest life. And like most people who ever end up planning a heist, Carlos had a decent amount of smarts and a serious love for action movies. That combo? You'll find it in nearly every person who's ever robbed a bank. But what made Carlos different was that he was actually a good guy. Straight up, law-abiding. Never even thought about stealing. Ever. Then, in the early 2000s, he met a woman named Brandy. They got married in 2002. Like most young couples, they dreamed of having a baby. But their bodies just didn't click biologically. They tried everything modern medicine could offer, but nothing worked. In 2005, they finally had one last shot. Brandy got pregnant. But the pregnancy didn't last. The baby didn't make it. And just like that, their dream was shattered. That's when Carlos realized their only hope was adoption. But adoption, it's a long, expensive road, and he didn't have the money for it. That same year, Carlos went out one night with an old friend named Diaz, who worked as an employee at Miami International Airport. During that night, Carlos finally broke down. He cried, hard, told Diaz everything. His life in America, the struggles, the heartbreak, and the dream of becoming a father that now seemed completely out of reach. It was rough. Carlos was in pieces. And here's where we pause, because this moment matters. We all go through moments of weakness, times when we crack, spill our guts, and just need someone to hear us out. But in those moments, you have to be careful who you open up to. Because when you're at your lowest, you're also at your most vulnerable. And if you pick the wrong person to confide in, that could be the beginning of the end. Just like it was for Carlos. After listening to everything, Diaz looked at him and said, "I've got a solution that could change your life, man. Like, really give you the American dream. For real." Carlos was surprised. He asked what Diaz meant. Diaz replied calmly, "The key is the airport where I work." Then he laid it all out. Every day, planes land carrying huge amounts of money. Once the cash is offloaded, it gets moved in armored trucks to a special garage next to the airport. In that garage, the money bags are inspected thoroughly. Once the checks are done, the cash goes straight to the Federal Reserve Bank. And the amount moved daily? Somewhere between $80 to $100 million. Carlos, who had never even thought about stealing, looked confused and asked, "So, what does this have to do with me?" Diaz leaned in and said, "I work inside that garage. I know the place like the back of my hand. And honestly, we could rob it." Then he started breaking down the layout, the timing, the routines, how it could actually work. But that night, Carlos said no, a hard number. He wanted nothing to do with it. They ended the night and went their separate ways, and Diaz thought that was the end of it. But the truth? The idea stuck in Carlos's head. It started haunting him. He couldn't shake it. He wasn't thinking about taking all the money, just a small piece on maybe 500 grand, maybe $1 million. Just enough to change his life completely. And then, he started justifying it. "I'll take the money, clean it through small businesses, use the profits to make more than the original amount. Then I'll return the $1 million to the bank later. Nobody gets hurt. The bank wins. I live off the profits." In his mind, he wasn't stealing. He was just borrowing. And that was the beginning of the game. Of course, what was going through Carlos's mind was nothing more than a desperate excuse. But he needed it. He needed something to soothe his conscience, a moral exit ramp, so he could go through with stealing the money without tearing himself apart inside. And in his mind, this excuse, it was the best lie he could believe. A few days later, he called Diaz, asked to meet up again. And truth is, Diaz already knew exactly what Carlos was calling for. When they sat down, Diaz came prepared, almost too prepared. He brought detailed photos, schematics, blueprints, the kind of stuff you'd think only existed in a movie. It was like he'd been waiting for this moment for years. They sat together for nearly 6 hours. But the whole time, Carlos wasn't focused on how to pull off the job. He was focused on how it might fail. He knew that even if the robbery went off perfectly, they'd get caught eventually. So instead of starting at the beginning, Carlos started at the end, the part where everything falls apart. He ran through every single detail. He knew the Hollywood formula by heart. He'd watched it so many times. A flawless plan, a skilled crew, a smooth execution, a perfect getaway. Then one stupid mistake by one dumb team member ruins it all. The money gets recovered. Everyone ends up in prison. That's why Carlos did it backwards. Step 1. Make a plan for what happens after they're caught. Step 2. Figure out how to divide the money between the crew in a way that doesn't fall apart when things go south. Those 2 steps, they were the core. They were the secret. As for the security weaknesses Diaz showed him, that was the biggest shock of all. They didn't just make the job possible, they made it look easy. All the flaws came down to one thing: overconfidence. The employees trusted the system too much and totally slacked off on basic security procedures. For example, the cash gets offloaded from the plane with just 2 guards present. It's driven in an armored truck, no police escort. At the garage, only 3 workers unload it. And the most shocking part? The garage door is left wide open for ventilation. The result? A small crew could literally walk through the front door, take the money, and walk right back out, with barely any resistance. But Carlos wasn't naive. Even though the plan looked simple, he knew, from all those movies, that the devil's in the details. So he decided to scout the place himself before making a single move. He booked a hotel room near the garage. On a Saturday, he watched everything with his own eyes: how the money came in, how it was moved. Then he checked out. Came back Wednesday. Rented the same room. Watched the process all over again. He needed to be sure. Was the routine consistent? Were the security flaws still there? Was the carelessness standard? He repeated this 5 times, 5 different days. Every time it was the same. Same timing, same weaknesses, same sloppy security. That's when he made his decision. The job would happen from inside the garage, not outside. Robbing the airport? No chance. Hitting the armored truck during transport? That's suicide? Stealing right at the garage door? Too risky? Cameras everywhere? But inside? That was a whole different story. The plan was built on fear. Come in fast, strong, and intimidating. Scare the workers so badly that they freeze. No bullets fired. Because the first shot? That's when the alarms go off. That's when the cops show up. That's when it all collapses. And there was one more key part to Carlos's strategy. They wouldn't take all the money. This wasn't a full-blown heist. This was a precision hit, fast, clean, and limited. Grab a few bags. Get out. Why? Because once the armored truck unloads the cash in the garage, it leaves and comes back later to transport the inspected money to the Federal Reserve. So the idea was simple. If the heist goes down before the truck returns, they'll have time to escape, and they won't run into a single armed guard. And that was Carlos's true goal. A quick hit. No violence. No mess. Just fast enough to work and vanish. Now, the rest of Carlos's plan? That would all come to light on execution day. Because the time had finally come. Time to build the crew. Carlos had a very smart idea. The team had to be made up of completely normal people, no criminal records. That way, they'd stay under the radar as long as possible. See, in cases like this, cops always start by checking out the usual suspects, people with priors, names that already show up in police files. But if no one's got a record, the cops are practically chasing ghosts. And Carlos had one more rule. There had to be strong ties between crew members. either blood relatives or people with deep loyalty. That way, there's trust, there's chemistry, and most importantly, no one questions orders. But above all else, he needed their absolute loyalty. They had to follow his lead before, during, and after the job. Because Carlos wasn't just thinking about the robbery. He had a whole plan for what comes next. Based on all that, he picked 3 men, his brother-in-law, his wife's brother, and a co-worker from his job. As for Diaz, the guy who started it all and gathered the intel, Carlos cut him out of the actual heist. Diaz didn't know when it was going down, didn't know how. He found out about it the same way the other garage workers did, when it happened. But Carlos still kept his word. Diaz's cut of the money? Safe and fair. To make sure everything went smooth, the crew met up and agreed to stick to Carlos's plan to the letter. They swore to follow every instruction, no matter how weird or illogical it might seem. 1 month before the big day, Carlos finally revealed the plan to his co-worker. The problem? They needed 2 cars, not 1. Carlos, who drove heavy trucks for a construction equipment rental company, used his experience to pull off a mini heist of their own with his co-worker in just 1 night. They first stole a Chevy panel van, then a small Ford pickup. They loaded both stolen vehicles onto a big flatbed truck and drove them to his co-worker's house, parked them in a hidden garage. They stayed there, untouched, for a full month. Then came the big day. November 6th, 2005. At 1 p.m., the crew rolled out toward the garage where the cash was usually sorted and counted. They watched in silence, waiting. At 3 p.m., the armored truck pulled in. The cash was unloaded. 10 minutes later, just like always, the truck left. And the garage door? Still wide open. 2 minutes. That's all they needed. Masks on. They jumped into the van, heading straight for the garage gate. 3 of them jumped out, stormed in carrying M16s. But Carlos had made it very clear beforehand. The guns must never be loaded. Safety on. Always. No bullets, no accidents, no panic shots. This had to be clean. No blood, no noise, just speed and fear. They burst in, masked up, rifles pointed, yelling loud to freak everyone out, freeze them in place. And in that moment, Diaz played a critical role. He collapsed to the ground, screaming, panicking, shaking, making the scene even scarier. His breakdown made the other workers panic harder. They didn't even think to resist. Within seconds, everybody was on the floor, just like they'd planned. Each crew member grabbed 2 bags of cash. But as they were leaving, one of the sacks slipped from the hands of Carlos's wife's brother. He turned to go back for it, but Carlos yelled, "Leave it! Get in the car now!" They left with only 5 bags of money. They jumped into the van and floored it, racing toward another garage nearby. Waiting there was the second vehicle, the Ford pickup. Inside were duffel bags and backpacks. They quickly moved the money from the large sacks into the smaller bags and jumped into the second vehicle. The 4th guy, the co-worker, drove off in the original Chevy van, following them from a distance. The plan was genius. If the cops chased the van, the pickup escapes with the money. If the van got stopped, they'd find it empty. No money, maybe not even a driver. And if the co-worker did get caught, he had strict orders. Run. But even if they arrested him, and he kept his mouth shut, the worst-case scenario? 3 years in prison. After that, he'd walk out to find his cut waiting for him. The crew kept driving, all the way to a completely remote area, off the grid. There, they stepped out of the 2 vehicles, doused them in gasoline, and set them on fire. The message was clear. No evidence left behind. No fingerprints, no hair, no DNA, nothing. Burn it all, so there's nothing for the cops to connect back to them. Once the flames consumed both cars completely, they climbed into Carlos's personal vehicle, which had been hidden there in advance. And just like that, they drove back to the city, calm, quiet, like nothing had ever happened. But the caution didn't end there. Nobody went to anyone's house. No group meetups. No splitting the money. No casual chats. Carlos personally dropped each crew member off at their homes, then went straight to his place and hid the cash somewhere only he knew. And just like that, the whole operation vanished. For 2 weeks. That too was part of Carlos's strict blueprint. No contact, no meetings, no phone calls. For 2 full weeks. Especially with Diaz, who, remember, stayed behind at the garage. Everyone knew he'd be put under heavy investigation, but the beauty of Carlos's plan. Diaz genuinely didn't know any details about the job. Not the date, not the method, nothing. So even under pressure, the cops had nothing on him. To reassure Diaz that everything had gone smoothly, he and Carlos had agreed on a secret signal. Diaz would drive by Carlos's house. If he saw a specific flag hanging outside, that meant the job was a success. And sure enough, after 4 separate interrogation sessions, Diaz walked out clean. Investigators said, this man had absolutely nothing to do with the robbery. As for Carlos and the rest of the crew, no prints, no witnesses, no leads, no links. They were completely off the radar. 2 weeks passed, and it was finally time to regroup. But this wasn't just any meeting. It was a party. At the party, Carlos stood up in front of the group and said, "We did it. Now it's time to open the bags and count the take." As for Diaz, Carlos told him to stay silent. No calls, no visits, nothing. Not to Carlos, not to anyone. Then came the moment of truth. They opened the bags, $7.4 million. But even with that massive haul, Carlos stuck to the plan. He looked around and told them firmly, "No one spends this money. Not yet. It stays hidden until we find a top-tier lawyer, someone who knows how to launder money professionally. Then, and only then, will we divide the shares legally and safely." Until that time came, Carlos decided to give each person an advance, $100,000. He told them, "This isn't the money you dreamed about. This is just a taste. Spoil yourself a little, live normally, and forget about the millions for now." He handed $100,000 to each member and sent the same amount to Diaz. Then, he gave them strict instruction sheets. Each paper detailed exactly what they could and couldn't do with the money. Basically, how to spend without drawing attention. Because like we said at the start of this story, there's always one idiot in every heist. The kind of guy whose dumb moves get everyone caught. And Carlos knew exactly who that guy was this time. Jeffrey Botwright, Carlos's brother-in-law. Carlos knew he was weak, reckless, obsessed with money. And sure enough, Carlos was right. Jeffrey didn't technically break the rules, but he started hanging around sketchy places. No tax records, no security cameras, no oversight. And there, he went full Hollywood. Drinks, drugs, wild parties, a life spiraling out of control. He went from a regular nobody to a wannabe rock star, spending cash like he was in a movie. But believe it or not, that still wasn't the fatal mistake. There was one thing Jeffrey did. Something weird, something no one saw coming. And that one thing? It would bring the whole operation crashing down. It would lead to the turning point in the entire story. Because of it, Jeffrey got kidnapped. February 16th, 2006. Jeffrey made the dumbest move he could have ever made. He broke the rules and called Carlos. He said, "I'm out of money, and I need a huge amount, not just anything. They want ransom, $1.5 million, or they'll kill me." Carlos was stunned. He snapped back, "What the hell are you talking about? Where am I supposed to get $1 million from?" And then, it wasn't Jeffrey's voice anymore. Someone else grabbed the phone and said, "Jeffrey's been hanging with us every night, getting drunk, running his mouth, telling us everything. The robbery, the $7.4 million, all of it. Now he's our guest. If you ever want to see him alive again, get us $1.5 million." Carlos, furious and shocked, hung up the phone immediately. To him, Jeffrey wasn't worth saving. The guy brought this on himself. But what Carlos didn't know was that his phone had been tapped. How? Well, during Diaz's investigation at the garage, the detectives asked him about his close friends. He mentioned several names, but he left Carlos out. That raised a red flag. When they looked deeper, they found Carlos and Diaz had traveled together, stayed in hotels together, moved around a lot together. So why hide his name? That was all they needed to start monitoring Carlos closely. For weeks they found nothing. But that phone call, that was the slip-up they'd been waiting for. The kidnapper repeated every detail of the heist. The amount, the plan, everything. It was no longer speculation. It was evidence. The very next day, while Carlos and his wife were at a medical center for a full checkup, the police stormed in. Carlos was arrested on the spot. He had $5,000 in cash, a bit much for a doctor's visit. And back at his house, they found $80,000 stashed away. Game over. Carlos was officially in deep. And still, even in custody, Carlos refused to help Jeffrey, which honestly made sense. Someone like Jeffrey, he'd crumble under pressure and take everyone down with him. But then the detectives made Carlos an offer. "Help us find the kidnappers, and we'll reduce your sentence." Carlos agreed. He called the gang. The police recorded everything. They traced the location and rescued Jeffrey. The kidnappers were arrested, 3 of them, all repeat offenders, and sentenced heavily. But that wasn't all. 5 members of Carlos's crew were also arrested. The lightest sentence? 11 years. The harshest? 17 years. Carlos himself got 17 years, but thanks to his cooperation, it was reduced to 10. Now comes the real question. Where's the money? Carlos led them to a stash with only $1.2 million. When they asked, "Where's the rest?" everyone claimed they got their cut and spent it. But there was no proof of that. In 2016, Carlos walked out of prison, a free man. His wife had divorced him while he was inside. She remarried, had 2 kids. As for Carlos, he said in an interview, "I destroyed my life, never got to enjoy the money, lost my wife, the American dream. It was all a lie. Now I'm going back to Cuba." But is that really the end of the story? Some people say, not even close. There's a theory that Carlos planned everything from the start. Jeffrey's stupidity, the cops catching on, the arrests, all part of the plan. Why? Well, each guy only got $100,000. Carlos left behind $1.2 million in a spot everyone knew about. But the other $5 million? Rumor has it, he secretly smuggled it to Cuba. His logic? If things go south, I give him the $1.2 million. If anyone comes asking for money, I hand them a piece. But the real fortune? That's safe. In Cuba. And sure enough, even though everything fell apart within just 2 months, Carlos was the first one out. He returned home, where supposedly millions were waiting. Some say he never went back to Cuba at all. He's living somewhere else under a new name, enjoying all $5 million. Personally, I don't doubt it. But here's the one question that still haunts me. Would someone actually choose to spend 10 years in prison just to come out to $5 million? If we're being real, most people work 20 years straight and don't make a single million. So maybe Carlos thought, in 10 years, I'll never make that kind of money. Might as well do the time and come out rich. But you, could you give up 10 years of your freedom for a shot at $5 million? Could you survive behind bars for a decade just to walk out to a fortune? Me? No way. I couldn't survive 1 month in prison, let alone 10 years. A single month would break me, even if you offered me all the money in the world. And that was our story for today. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Carlos planned it all from the beginning? And what really happened to the missing $5 million? Is he a criminal mastermind? Or just a lucky guy who got away? And if you want to hear more brilliant stories just like this one, click on the videos right here on the screen. We've got the greatest prison escape in history, pulled off like a Hollywood movie, and a heist so perfect, the gang almost got away with millions, with barely a trace. Catch you in the next one.